Hello there and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for the Mandragora silk taffeta suit jacket. And that's right, here I have the mock-up, the baddie-backed version here. Of course, the front is not nearly as exciting as the back on this jacket, but the same will be true of today's jacket as well. And we've already seen me make this pattern, so I just have a few tiny tweaks to make before I make the next one. I think I brought the collar out a little bit, things like that, very small tweaks that I'll show you over on the blue patterning table of doom. And then we'll jump into making this jacket because I have a lot of embellishment to get through today, and I'm really not sure how long this video is going to be. Between the bound buttonholes and interlining things and all the embellishment on the back of this could end up being kind of a long video, so let's go ahead and dive in. And here we have my pattern from last time when I made the baddie-backed version. Again, that will be linked in a card, of course, so you can check out the original pattern drafting for this jacket. I'm just going to make a few small changes today for things that I noticed. I actually have a little list here of things I wanted to change. So I did add on 5/8 of an inch to the neckline up here, as you can see, and just tapered that down into the front, and I added that same 5/8 of an inch onto my collar pattern as well, just so that that still matched up with the front there. And then this curve between the front yoke and the side front was a little bit too curvy. It made it hard to get it super smooth, so I went ahead and straightened that out just a little bit. And then I want to go ahead and on the side front and side back pieces of this, I want to raise the waistline about 1/4 of an inch. I think I did 3/8 of an inch, honestly. And so I'm going to take 3/8 of an inch off the bottom of these pieces, and then I will add on 3/8 of an inch to the skirt piece that this gets sewn onto. I just noticed that my waistline was a tiny bit above where this was creasing on the first jacket, so I wanted to go ahead and move this up so it was in the exact right spot for me and my body and my usual undergarments, things like that. So I'm just adding that onto here. Now this circumference of this inner circle, when I add this onto this circular shape, it's smaller than it used to be. So for this to still fit down, I ended up adding on 1/4 of an inch to the back of this as well, just so that everything would still fit together properly and I wouldn't have to worry about this being a different size after making that adjustment. And I wasn't sure if that was going to work, but it did. So I can't say like I recommend it necessarily, doing it this kind of haphazardish way, but it worked for me. So I'm going on through my checklist here of things I wanted to fix on this pattern. I do want to move the buttonhole that I had at the waist also down 1/2 inch. So I'm going to erase the bottom 3 buttonholes. I'm going to keep the top one where it was. I'm going to move the bottom buttonhole down 1/2 inch so it's exactly at my waist. And then I will just find the distance between the two of these. This is like the math portion of this, and it takes me several tries. I can't explain how to do this. Mostly I just have a button between, like as close to as between the bust point as I can, because like right at apex level would be preferable, but it wasn't exactly going to line up for this particular jacket. Something to keep in mind for the future. I might need to do a 5-button as opposed to a 4-button situation to make that really work out. So I move my buttonholes around, and then I could finally cut this all out of the silk. Again, this is the Mandragora colorway of the ribbed silk taffeta from Silk Baron. They do not currently have this color in stock. They have other colors that are very delicious as well, though, and I do hope they bring this one back sometime. But I will cut everything out of this silk, and I'm actually going to cut the peplum side pieces out of the silk for the lining as well. But otherwise, I will cut this out of a black lining, and then here out of black muslin as well. So in general, I have 3 layers. I have the interlining, this black muslin for the silk, and then a rayon lining, and most of the body of the jacket is going to be rayon lining, but I will line the skirt portion and the center fronts with the silk as well, just so that if anything peeks open or out, it will still be nice and olive green in there. And then for these front pieces, instead of cutting interlining for the 2 front pieces on the outside layer, I will just go ahead and interface them with fusible interfacing here. And I do have to go ahead and interline all these pieces. I am just going to go ahead and run these through the serger today. Although this will be fully lined, so I'm not worried about the raw edges, I just want to baste everything together and flat line these pieces with the cotton, and the easiest and quickest way to do that is going to be just to serge the raw edges here. And I didn't notice that created too much bulk or anything in the finished product. I did do a test piece of this, but I think it'll be just fine. So I'm just gonna run all that through the serger as a way to baste these 2 layers together. This is just the flat lining to give structure, not necessarily to smooth the inside in any way. I will have this be bag lined with the silken rayon lining later, but for now, all this just needs to be interlined for some structure with this cotton. Like so, and now I have my 2 center back pieces and I can start sewing this together. I'm going to sew the center back of this all the way down, like the very center back, and then 1/2 inch past this little angle here that will become a pleat this time. I'm going to keep this pleat open this time because I didn't really like how I did it on the black version, and this version I preferred more. I did already cut my collar out. We'll talk more about that collar later. I'll just set that aside for now. And then I have my 2 side front pieces here. I'm going to go ahead and attach the yokes to these. Just different steps in the process here. I can attach these on. Again, this curved line was a bit curvier in the black version, but today I did smooth it out so it's a little bit straighter, just because I wanted to have this be a very smooth area, even though it's going to be covered in embellishment later, so it doesn't actually really matter. But, oh well, I made the difference anyway. But here I am sewing that center back seam. My pins are mostly out of the way enough, but I'll try and be good and remove them as I go here, since I have them parallel with the seam line here, as opposed to perpendicular, for goodness knows what reason. I do get that question sometimes, like why my pins are facing a certain direction. Usually the answer is, there is no answer. It's just like I grab them and who knows what I'm up to. Like my fingers have a mind of their own when they're putting the pins in. So sometimes I have the pins all facing one direction like this. Sometimes it's mixed, and sometimes it's the opposite way. None of it actually means anything. It's just what I thought would hold it best temporarily in the moment, you know? But now we have a few seams done. I can go ahead and start pressing those open. And like so. Making my little swallowtail-ish back to this. I'll press those pleats in a moment. For now, I'm going to go ahead and press open this curved yoke seam. And I do need to put a couple of clips in this for it to lie perfectly smooth, but it's already lying smoother than the poly shantung version was last time. So that's always nice. This taffeta does press really well and nice. And a lot of times people will say, oh, taffeta looks so wrinkly. And it's not necessarily like that it's wrinkled. Like if you sit down on it for a couple hours, it'll be wrinkled. But it just has like crinkles. Like that's part of the allure of taffeta, in my opinion, especially iridescent taffeta like this, is that it's going to crinkle and show those different colors. It's what I like almost seeing in old paintings, even like silk in its crinkles and all the different colors, like the way it iridesces when it's crinkled like that. So I think it's a perk of taffeta as opposed to a problem with taffeta. But I could be in a minority in this. But I'm just sewing the side seams, those like straight, probably like 9 inches long side seams here, on my bodice pieces. Sewing the side fronts to the side backs because I do need to sew those together first before I can sew the peplum pieces, the like lower skirt portion of the jacket, onto these. These need to be sewn together first. A lot of times when it comes to order of operations, it's just like what logically has to happen in order for like the next step. So in order to sew the skirt on to either of these pieces, because the skirt is one piece, these 2 pieces need to become one as well. So how do I figure out what step comes next? My brain kind of just logically works through it automatically these days. I don't know. I don't really think about it too hard. I just like reach for a piece, and if I can't sew it yet, I have to work backwards from there. I do, of course, have a lot of experience sewing projects at this point. So, you know, back in the day, I didn't like read a book to learn how to do things in order. I just sewed a few things from patterns and like kind of learned the order from working with commercial patterns back when I was like a teenager in high school. Not that that was a very fun time because, of course, fitting commercial patterns is a nightmare and a half, and I was very glad when I got to university and learned how to do pattern drafting, because that changed everything for me in my personal sewing, that's for sure. But just sewing those peplum pieces on. Of course, that peplum piece is a bit curvier than the waistline seam so that it flares outwards past my hips extra. Basically, it's not made to fit perfectly the skirt portion of this. It's made to flare out a little bit. But I did clip that curve, and now I'm pressing it open, again using the nice stiffness of my tailor's ham as opposed to the wobbly ironing board. I need to get an upgrade to a good ironing board when I have a new sewing room in the future, hopefully, one day. But just pressing that smooth, set those aside for now. I can keep working on the center back portion here. I'm going to go ahead and line this back pleat with a piece of silk, just a single layer of the silk, just to face the back of this pleated area. You'll see how this works out in the end once the lining is in, the rest of the lining, I suppose. But I'm just going to line this down the center back and along the hem line, just so that I can face this with silk. And I'm not going to use that along the side seam, just along the center back and the hem. So here we are along the hem to a point, leave that needle down, pick up the presser foot, move around the corner, lower the presser foot back down. That's just how I maneuver around corners. And sewing that spare piece of silk on here. I do still have a tiny bit of this Mandragora silk left over because the shape of this skirt piece for this suit was such a strange shape that I have like a narrow length of yardage left over from cutting that skirt out. And I think I could probably make like a top or even a short sleeve little jacket to wear with that skirt from last week again. So in the future, we may still have another Mandragora silk project coming up. But for now, this is the kind of finale of this current Mandragora project. If I add on to this suit by making a short sleeve jacket in the future, of course, I will show you that as well. But here, let me just press that lining towards the inside, and I can press this pleat into place, basically. So you'll see that here. Here we go. So again, I'm just finessing the edge with my fingertips on the tailor's ham and then ironing everything into place. Now that everything's turned right side out, I did have to clip my curves and my corners, you may have noticed there. Of course, I always clip my curves and corners if I want them to lay smoothly. I could have understitched this as well, but I didn't bother because I knew the taffeta would hold the crispy edge no problem. So here's this one side done. I will have to do the other side, of course, like so. So I can go ahead and grab my other spare piece of silk and do the same thing for this other side. But now that the backs are all together, because I needed to have that portion finished before I could sew it here to the side backs, I can go ahead and sew this to the side backs. Again, this is a sort of princess seam, so it's a little bit curvy, but not too bad at all. Especially here on the back, because we don't have the bust to contend with like we do on the front. But I will go ahead and back over here on the machine. Again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just stitch those on to the back piece. So the main body of the jacket is mostly together here. We just don't have our front pieces because, of course, I'm going to have to do my bound buttonholes in those front pieces. Well, in one side of the front. So that'll be coming up next. And the utility room has started to make noise. So those of you who have really good headphones will be able to pick that up. Everybody else doesn't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm just going to clip that seam, press that open, like so that everything is nice and smooth. A little bit of steam there. On the other side it looks like this. Yummy crispy silk. It's so nice to work with. It's a little bit of a thicker silk taffeta, this ribbed stuff too. It comes in a lovely like magenta/blue color that's very iridescent. I don't need a magenta/blue silk anything. But like, do we ever need silk garments in 2022? Probably not, but I sure do like them. So I just have that trimmed, and now I can sew my back yokes to my back pieces. But before I do that, I'll go ahead and do the other side here. So everything getting sewn, main body together. I was jumping ahead, getting excited about my yokes. No, sew the other side first, and then you can put these yokes on. There we go. Just pin those so I know which side goes where. Don't get confused. I try and, I do easily get confused. So I try and like pin things, leave a pin in a pattern piece like where it's the front so I know what I'm looking at, or like if I'm doing things that are left and right, marking them in some way so that I don't get lost, because it did used to happen to me quite a lot, and now I'm just extra cautious to avoid such problems. I wish my brain was a little less distracted so I didn't have to leave myself all these markers like that, but the brain does what it does, and one has to learn to work with what you've got when it comes to all that gushy stuff in your skull. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But thank goodness I figured out that I have PMDD, so now I know a little bit more what's going on in my brain sometimes as soon as I look at a calendar, which is useful. Because before I just thought, why do I have depression only a week and a half out of every month? And then the rest of the time I'm fine, which seemed a little bit rude. And now I know why. Honestly. Silly brains, get it together. Luckily, this whole project I was in a good headspace to do, so things worked out for this jacket. I can't say the same. I was working on a dress last week, and it had me real foggy trying to figure out how the angled darts worked on the skirt and stuff, so, sometimes I'm better at sewing than other times, honestly. But now that the rest of the main body of the jacket is together, I need to work on the fronts here and the lining, and I will do anything to not have to do my bound buttonholes. So I'm going to go ahead and put the lining together before I do that. Anything I can do to procrastinate the buttonholes, where I really do have to focus quite hard, I will do. So here I have the lining pieces. I'm going to sew them together basically the same way that I sewed the rest of the jacket, the same order of operations, I suppose. The only difference here is, again, this is a black rayon lining here, and then again, the olive green silk I'll use for the fronts of the lining and the peplum area as well. Like I said already, but in case you didn't know what I was talking about, hopefully you'll see shortly. Oh no, not only do we have utility room, we also have lawnmower man. It is fall now. Give up on the yard, sir. Alright, well, again, those of you with excellent headphones can now hear lawnmower man in the distance. Although last night I was laying in bed and there were fireworks going off outside. At least I hope they were fireworks. This is America, you never quite know. And I just don't know why people were having fireworks on September 21st, but they were for some reason. Very strange. But here I am starting the process for my bound buttonholes. It's finally time. I put my lining together. Can't put it off any longer. So I'm marking where on my pattern pieces I wanted my buttonholes to be, and then I have my little rectangles for my cutout area for each buttonhole, basically, drawn onto the silk organza that I'm going to use for this. This is black silk organza, nice and thin for doing this kind of multi-layered situation. This is not the only way to make bound buttonholes, it's just the way I prefer and the way I can make them cleanest. There's another way that uses doesn't use this window method. It uses the window fabric to make the lips of the buttonhole as well. And that, for me, is just too difficult. So this is the only way I can do it. I will also link to a blog post showing how to do this by Laura May, who is an excellent seamstress, both online on her blog and on Instagram. I can actually link to her Instagram as well, because if you're not following her, then you're missing out on some very couture sewing. So you should follow her. I'm sewing little squares of fabric together here to make those lips later. Again, if you've seen my video on the black jacket, you've already seen me do some bound buttonholes recently. So same idea here. Just in silk, nice and crispy this time. Again, I'm using a small stitch length to do this, my kind of standard stitch length, which is 12 stitches per inch. I'm just going to sew around these boxes following my colored pencil line on this organza, and do that for all 4 buttonholes here. Luckily, this jacket only has 4 buttonholes, 4 buttons, which is good because I invested in very pretty buttons for this, check glass buttons that you'll see later, but also just because it means I only have to sew 4 of these. But I probably should have done a little bit of a higher rise in this jacket, like added an inch to the top of the neckline and then done 5 buttons. That way I could really have one right at the bust, but things to consider for future jacket projects, honestly. This one still came out fine. I just, I can always find something to perfect later on. So I have my little butterfly flaps of squares, lips pressed open up there. They are just basted together, those, that I do use a larger stitch length for. And I will need to cut my windows open here now, and I have to be careful while doing this. I need to cut them out in this pattern here. So I need to cut them down the middle and then with triangles into each corner. So this is the pattern that you need to cut these out in order to use that seam allowance, this little triangles and weird trapezoids in the next step. So you're gonna need those. So don't get fancy. You just need to cut them out in the pattern, I promise. I'm just going to press that those curtains of my windows to the inside, basically, like so. I need to press these a little bit cleaner, but I'm just doing the first round here, and then I'll clean up the edges a little bit. Of course, if you have organza that matches the color of your fabric, this is a lot less visible, but here I have black. So this fabric luckily does have black in the weave, so it's not too jarring, but unless you press these absolutely perfectly, you will see the organza a tiny bit, so it's good to have it match so that you can't see it. You know what I mean. But I will line up my lips underneath here, just making sure my buttons fit in here. That's good. Again, vintage check glass buttons. I can link to the Etsy shop where I picked those up. Were quite the investment on this project, but I figured the rest of it was silk, and silk I already had in my stash, so I might as well grab some embellishment stuff for this project since I hadn't spent anything on it yet. It was a stash project otherwise. But I will pin my little buttonhole lips into place here, hoping to get that as centered as possible. But this is a separate piece here. I finished the window with organza, and then the lips of this buttonhole are completely separate. Lawnmower man! You probably can't hear it, but it sure is bothering me. Why would you do this to me? Honestly, it's fall now. You should be raking leaves. Not yet. They haven't even turned, let alone fallen. But a girl can dream. Up in the mountains they will have turned, and I'm excited to go check that out shortly. Hopefully this weekend I'll be heading up to see those golden aspens. So now we fold everything back gently and sew the little triangles to the lips. So I'm folding this back. There's that little triangle that I made sure when I cut, it's still there. And I just sew and backstitch over that little spot. So just forward, back. It's like 6 or 7 stitches. It's not very long. And then the same on the long sides. I fold this back, stitch down that little bit of seam allowance to the lips fabric. It's really annoying to call them lips, but it is really, whatever. You know what I mean. Same for the other side. So we have all 4 sides sewn down now. Oh, the utility room stopped making noise. Once again, you are not experiencing this, but I am, okay? Now that my button is done, I can trim down some of this extra fabric. I like to have my squares 3 inches by 3 inches at least. I like having room to work with. And then I will just grade the extra seam allowance down in here. I could even grade this further, but this will be fine. And then I will go ahead and do the other 3 the same way, and they will all look like this in the end. And remove all my spare threads that are bothering me. Get out of the way. So next one, same idea. position that other layer underneath so that the basted closure between the two lips is in the center of the box. And then for this other side is going to be the lining for this piece. So this is a lining piece here. Again, I said it's going to be lined in olive on the fronts. And so this is a lining front. This one is not flat lined in any way. It's just a piece of silk. And I'm going to go ahead and create slightly larger windows to match up with these buttons so that there are windows on the back as well when I line this eventually. So once those windows are finished, it looks like this. And once this gets lined up, once this is sewn together, it will look like this. And I will hand stitch, like kind of fell these down on the inside later on, much later on. We have the rest of the jacket to construct here. This is the other front that is also interfaced. This will be the button side. Now we have the buttonhole side. We can sew both of those onto the rest of the main body of the jacket that we assembled earlier. So I'll just go ahead and sew my front princess seam here, line everything up. This is my new favorite princess style line, where it goes up into the neckline as opposed to the shoulder or the arm side. I still don't have a name for this style of princess seam. It's not an arm side princess, it's not a shoulder princess, it's a neckline princess. So that's what I'll be calling it until we find out what its actual name is. I can only assume, logically, that it is neckline princess, but who knows? I'm glad that these are royal seams, you know? Are there duchess and countess and other kinds of seams as well? I highly doubt it. And then I will clip over the bust curve and at the waist curve as well, and just press this seam open and flat. Again, using my tailor's ham to help me iron. And again, as I do say quite often, pressing and ironing your seams open and clipping your curves, etc. This is what, this is half of sewing. Half of sewing is pressing and making sure things are smooth before you move on. That's just going to give you the best result possible. So if you hate ironing, I'm sorry, but it is essential for sewing. And if you want to upgrade your sewing room, a good idea is to get a better iron. This Chi iron I've been quite enjoying so far. We'll see how long it takes to, die on me. But I've never had an iron last too long. I need to invest in a legit, gravity feed iron again. Possibly in the future when I set up my next sewing room, which we don't know when that will be. Maybe, we're all keeping our fingers crossed, right? Next year, I will be able to buy a house. We'll see how it goes. A very cheap house, okay? But a very historic and needs fixin' house where I can set up another sewing room. Because, of course, that will be priority number one. I'll set up a place for me to sleep, and then I'll set up the sewing room because I have to keep working, of course. Otherwise, the rest of the house won't get done, that's for sure. But I'm just sewing my shoulder seams here, now that the fronts are on, to my jacket as well here. And then I will need to set in my sleeves to the outside of my jacket, but I haven't started making them. So let me go ahead and do that. Again, this is going to be a 3-layer sleeve situation. I have the silk layer here. I'm going to put my elbow dart in that. And then I'm going to put the same elbow dart into the interlining for this, which is going to be that cotton muslin. And then I will have a rayon layer as a lining for this as well. So I'm going to interline this sleeve with the cotton, the same as I did for the rest, just to keep the consistency and the texture of the silk by interlining it with this cotton. So I'll go ahead and serge around the raw edges of this, and I'll set the sleeves into the jacket, this outer layer, and then I will set the rayon lining sleeves into the lining before I put the lining and the jacket together. I do need to make a video all about bag lining because I've had some questions about it. So just for clarity, I will try and make a video just about that sometime in the future here. Although my schedule is rather packed with fun October projects, so we'll be doing that first. Sorry. Sorry, not sorry, honestly. Maybe when things slow down in spring, we'll get into lining, but before then I have a lot of spooky Halloween projects coming up that we're going to focus on instead. Apologies. But once my sleeves were constructed, I just sewed the underarm seam, and then I put in the gathering stitching at the top of my sleeves as well. I will go ahead and set these into the garment. Of course, once again, keeping things, keeping track of what side of the sleeve is the front, so I don't put these in backwards, or left in the right and right in the left. Always something that I, try and keep track of for myself. And luckily, with a little bit of gathering in the top of the sleeves like this, of course, fitting them in is even easier when you have a gathered sleeve cap, because if there's a little tiny bit of difference in size, it won't matter. It just gets lost in the gathering. And I will stitch those on over here on the machine. I am just using the same black Gutermann thread for this project as well. It's just all-purpose black polyester thread here. I don't use a ton of polyester in my sewing, although I suppose, you know, when it comes to iridescent and brocade and lame fabrics, often they only come in polyester. Obviously, this is an iridescent silk here, and when I can invest in silk, I go for it. But they don't usually have like plasticky, glittery silk. If someone ever figures out how to make that out of cellulose, I'll be well pleased, but not at this current time. So sometimes I work with very, very iridescent fabrics and very, very metallic fabrics, and those are polyester, but as a general rule, I always use polyester thread. So my life is not polyester free, you know? I also drive my car, which technically runs on polyester in some ways. It's all ancient marine life goop, you know? I can't live a plastic-free life, I don't think, sadly. I'm not cool enough. I've mentioned this before in my sustainability video, but I am like an Effie trinket. Like, you know, my glamour does not fit my worldview. But I am just tacking in some 5-layer cotton shoulder pads from Mood Fabrics. I can link these shoulder pads below. I quite like them. I've been putting them in lots of stuff recently, but these are the 5-layer cotton ones. So at least these are cotton. And I'll just tack those in here at the neckline and then at the in the sleeve puff at the end of the shoulder, just sewing those down to the seam allowance so that it don't show, the stitching doesn't show anywhere on the outside. But I'm just, you know, tacking these down on the inside quite messily because of course this will all be covered by the lining. I just need them to not move around too badly in here. And this garment will never be like thrown in the wash or anything, so I'm really not worried about them moving around and feel just fine just tacking them in place because this garment is not going to get a lot of rough and tumble, which, you know, it's silk for one thing, but you'll see why later also, because I can barely even like lean back on anything with what goes on in the back of this later. But with those shoulder pads tacked in, I finally remembered to put them in between the layers this time, unlike last time where I forgot. I will go ahead and bag line this jacket. So I'm putting the lining and the jacket together, right sides together, and I will pin all along the neckline, all along the bottom hem as well, to the back pleat on each side. And I'll show you how I finish this lining where it interacts with the already finished or like faced back pleat later on. But for now, just pinning all around my edges, right sides together, and then I can sew this two very long seams here. And again, always leaving the needle down in a corner, picking the presser foot up, turning the corner, putting the presser foot back down and keep sewing. But here I am going around the hem. Some pointy stuff going on in my hem, of course, because I can't get away from the sort of batwing-ish shapes. It's too fun. I did it for my Victorian costuming, and I'm doing it here for my silk suit. The only silk suit I've ever made, honestly. Once again, how many silk suits does one person need? Probably 0, but now I have one, which is exciting. It is hard to stay away from Silk Baron once you get going. They have so many beautiful colors of silk over there. They are my favorite source for silk, by the way. Silk Baron. I will link them in the description as well. But let me clip all my curves and my corners here so that I can turn this right side out. And although I'm turning this right side out here, I am going to leave it open for a minute because I want to do some understitching along the hemline of this jacket. So that's what I'm going to do here. Stitching the seam allowance from that seam we just sewed down to the lining side on the inside. It is kind of hard to maneuver this, but worth it to have a really crispy, nice hem on this jacket. Of course, I don't need to hem the jacket because it's all encased in the lining, but throwing some understitching in there to hold it nice and crisp. I should have done this on the black jacket as well, but it simply slipped my mind. I didn't even think to do it. That's one of those things that I actually, you know, I'm trying to learn to not skip is understitching. So I'm adjusting my practice after years of being too lazy to throw understitching in. Now I'm trying to be better about putting it in when I can. But now I need to go ahead and go around all the edges that have just been bag lined and press everything into place. Once again, using the tailor's ham to help me out with that. It's a nice stiff curved surface to be doing this kind of pressing on. And I'm keeping my iron with steam, but not too hot because I don't want to get any pressing marks onto this silk, of course. Making sure my window's lined up there. That's always nice. Please, please behave. You can see that puckering along the hem. That's where the understitching is, so it's not actually that puckered. It's fine. It's just the nature of wrinkly taffeta again. Crinkly taffeta, not wrinkly, crinkly. Let's call it that. But here I'm just folding in the edge of that lining where it meets up with the already lined back pieces from earlier. Just fold that under a 1/2 inch and I will hand slip stitch that shut. So So just finagling that on the other side as well. So that is ready to hand stitch down, and then this last little bit of the center portion of the lining I will turn under again a 1/2 inch, and again hand stitch that down to the tails of the back just here. And then I'm going to trim my collar area up here. I'm just making sure everything in my neckline is matching up, and anything that sticks out gets trimmed off, little corners and stuff, and lining up the lining layer with the outer layer, because this will be sewn like sandwiched inside of the collar in just a minute here. So we will finally start talking about that collar a little bit more. I'll show you how I draft stand collars. I've shown before, but it is really quite simple. I need to do a video all about drafting collars. Once again, perhaps next year in the spring, when usually I'm kind of hibernating and need ideas anyway. But here we are. I'm going to show you how I draft collar patterns. You're going to measure the back neckline of your project that you want to put the collar on. That was 3 inches here, and I'm going to square up from that. And you can see I have like a L shape drawn already, 90-degree angle center back. And then I will measure the front neckline as well, which is 3 3/4 this time. So I'll mark that like so and square up from that. And then I need to grab my, well, I need to come up a 1/2 inch here, and then I grab my French curve and just like rest that along the straight line until the curve hits that 1/2 inch mark. And then I will have that tiny bit of tilt up in the front of this, and then I can go ahead and add on my 1 inch collar. I draw 1 inch here. You can also curve out this corner if you want. My collar on this jacket is actually 1 1/4 inches, so I'll fix that in a minute. But I'm going to add seam allowance above and below this piece here. This will be cut with the center back on the fold back here. And then here I am just raising that so that it's 1 1/4 inches wide, which will make my pattern piece look nice and disgustingly confused and tangled for you. So sorry. This is going to be cut on the fold back here. So this area here, so I can cut this out like so. So we can get an idea of what the heck this actually looks like with all these lines, thanks to me making the collar not wide enough. You get it. You can make this 1 inch tall. You can make it 1/2 inch tall, which would be kind of a nightmare. I recommend at least 1 inch or 2 inches tall, however tall of a collar you want. But over here on the machine, I can go ahead and stitch my 2 layers of collar together. This is going to be lined with itself again on the silk with a iron-on interfacing. And I stop a 1/2 inch before the bit of seam allowance that gets sewn to the neckline. But I will clip my curves, clip my corners, press this buddy. You could understitch this as well. Again, I don't normally bother with my collars. If it's a floopier fabric, I will, but something as crispy as taffeta, especially taffeta with fusible already fused to it, it's like, you know, I don't know, it's like silky cardboard. It's not going anywhere. It's going to stand up really well here because I used interfacing on both layers of this. Technically, you only have to use interfacing on the outside layer, and the inside you can have just as the silk, but yeah. I'm going to fold that in half once it's pressed to find the center that will line up with my center back. So here's my center back of my jacket here. I can start pinning my collar on. The neckline of the jacket is curvier than the collar piece. The collar piece is much straighter. It's just slightly curved in the front. That's what makes the collar stand up. If it was the perfect curve, like if the curve of the collar and the curve of the jacket were the same, the collar would lay down along the jacket as opposed to stand up like we want it to, because it's a stand collar. So that's the reasoning behind this, but it is a little trickier to sew the collar on because you're sewing something more curved to something straighter. So that does make this a little bit more of a testing seam, a seam that will test you. But just patience and lots of pins, and I sew right over those pins. You know me, no fear. So one day maybe I'll lose an eye. Hopefully we'll get it on camera. But alas, I have no fear. Once again, as usual, I will just say disclaimer, sew over your pins at your own risk, but I do it all the dang time, and many people in the comments have told me that that's how they were taught as well. So perhaps we're all just old-fashioned, but here on The Closet Historian, we all know how I like old-fashioned things anyhow. But I'll just stitch that down over here on the machine, being careful in using my left hand to maneuver the project around to make sure I don't get tucks or any extra little tiny pleats in this, because I do want to avoid that and keep this as smooth as possible. So really my left hand is doing a lot of work here. My right hand is helping to ease this through the machine along with the feed dogs, but my left hand is making sure nothing is getting tucked underneath here that is extra, because we want to avoid that. Alright, so now I can go ahead and clip this seam, because again, curvy seams need to be clipped for best results. I think I forgot in the black jacket to clip that seam, which is a real shame. And probably why my collar doesn't lie as smooth on that one. But I can fold the underside, the lining side of the collar under a 1/2 inch and cover up my seam allowance in here, and I will go ahead and either slip stitch or fell this down. I believe I felled it here. I do like doing a little bit of felling. It's quite useful. But just turning everything under so it is clean, especially here at the edges, and clipping where I need to clip to make sure that things are smooth. Anything where it's going to be like encased inside of here, feel free to clip it, you know? Alright, so technically the jacket is almost finished. I just need to put my buttons on here, and then this will be a wearable, like semi-finished garment. That and then hemming the sleeves, which I don't even remember to film at all, but I hemmed the sleeves, you know. But I need to sew my nice glass check buttons on here, and then we can get started on the embellishment for the rest of this jacket, because it's a nice plain silk jacket right now, but we're about to go real hard with the beads and the sequins. So first off, I'm going to cover all these seam lines here for the yokes with some iridescent olive green glass beads with it's like a oval shaped bead with 2 holes in it, and then with gold sequins as well. So you can see this process here, just going along each of the seam lines up here along the collar and along the shoulder seam and along the yoke seams here. So I just thread a sequin on, then a seed bead, and then I go back down into the fabric through the sequin, but not the bead. So the bead kind of stays as a knot almost holding the sequin on. And then I'll sew the bead on next, and then another sequin, another bead, another sequin, another bead, all the way along here, covering these seams. That's why I was so careful to get these seams nice and smooth, but technically it is going to be covered. Usually I do top stitching, but today instead of top stitching I have just covering the seams entirely in beads, which is quite fun. It looks quite nice on its own, but this is just step 1 of the entire beading process on this. Now, luckily in my stash at this point, over the 15 years I've been collecting beads and sequins and sewing stuff. In my crafty stash and in my sewing stash, I have a lot of different shapes and sizes and colors of sequins, but I did pick up some extra shell sequins like this and extra things from Cartwright's Sequins, so I can go ahead and link them below. And then I also have some glass beetle beads that you'll see here, and I will link those below as well. But I'm going to go ahead and make 4 cicadas. You can see one here sitting on my other knee, to have on the back of this jacket. If you've seen my beaded bug brooch videos, very similar process going on here. I'm going to go ahead and use felt as a base for these larger pieces to go on the back of this jacket. And for these cicadas, I went ahead and used several of these bigger shell-shaped sequins. Shell-shaped sequins by the seashore. It's hard to say. But some of them I trimmed it down to create the little tapered end of this buddy. So I just cut the sequins with some craft scissors and poked new holes in them so I could sew them down. So that's kind of how I did this. So I just, these sequins only have 1 hole at the top of the shell or bottom of the shell. I don't know what the top and bottom of a shell is. I suppose that's the bottom of the shell. Anyway, they're like scallop shells. But I poked new holes in the sequins using a thicker needle and just pressing it through into some foam. And by some foam, I mean my mouse pad here on my desk. But I just created new holes where I needed them to be able to sew this all down to create the centers of these cicadas. I wanted to have even more colors of these shells in the end, so I ended up picking up a few more shell colors. If you saw that post on Instagram, I'll see if I can insert it here into the video, where I had poured all of the new shell sequins into a bowl to mix them up, just for fun, because it was just delightful to see them all together. But just stitching all those buddies down to make the center of my cicada. Then I'm going to outline the wing shapes here. You can see I've just drawn those onto some craft felt, which is what I'm doing here. I'm going to go ahead and outline the wing shapes with French knots, which again, if you've watched any of my other bug embroidery videos here on the channel, I can put a card up to one of them here, so you can check those out. I should really make a playlist that's like a crafting playlist or like a beaded bug playlist. So maybe I'll do that and put a card up to that here. If you want to see my other projects like this, I think my best one that is here on the channel is probably my black and white spider. So definitely check that one out. I can put a link to that one in the description. But all of my bug beading really came together for this buddy, because we're about to go entomologically wild on the back of this jacket, starting with some larger cicadas and beetles that I will fill in with much smaller bugs around them. You'll see exactly what I mean shortly. But this is just some regular cotton embroidery floss. I've separated it into just 3 strands, so it's not the full 6 strands it usually comes with. But I'm going to tie a knot in that, come up through the felt, wrap the thread around the needle 3 times, hold that taut, and then put the needle back through the felt, and that will create a French knot for me, like so. And so I will just go all the way around my wings with this finish. It's just usually how I create the outline of my bug pieces. Sometimes I will do split stitch, and you'll see that for a beetle in a minute here, but mostly I just do French knots all the way around to like give myself, I don't know, it's like if this were stained glass, it's like the leading that I need as an outline and a stable place to keep all the other stitches on the inside of this line, and that way when I cut this out later, I don't have to worry about cutting through any of my stitches, which hopefully will make sense when you see how close I cut these out. I didn't, for these cicadas, I just cut along the edge. I didn't fold the felt inside. For the beetles, I fold the edges of the felt inside so they're a bit puffy. Once again, check out some of my brooch videos to see additional process on my bug making, as it were. But for some of this, I decided to use a little bit of felt, just for a bit of a texture difference. So I'm cutting out some pieces of mustard yellow wool felt here to, again, kind of tuck into my French knots here in the center of this buddy. And then this will be held down mostly with the sequins I'm about to add. Just cutting out the correct shape here. There we go. Again, see, it looks a little bit like doing stained glass in some weird way here. Filling this in, and you could just tack that down. You could use it as padding. You could do really whatever you want when it comes to embroidery. It's a very free and open medium for you to play with. I love doing embroidery and embellishment. And it's a good thing too, because the back of this jacket took me, on my schedule, because I don't have a lot of sense. On my schedule, I put 2 days to make the back of this, or to like do the embroidery on this jacket. It actually took me, I think, 8 days, like full, like probably embroidering for around 6 hours each day, which will destroy you. My hands were fine, but my shoulders, because as you can see, I'm just bending over my own lap and doing this on my lap, were destroyed. So I need a better setup for this. Yes, I know. Is this ergonomic? Absolutely not. But, you know, who needs a skeleton? You know, that's fine. I don't mind destroying my body in pursuit of nice embroidered jackets. Surely it's fine. So, coming up through the felt, threading a sequin on, going back through the center of the last sequin. This is how I'm just doing these rows of interlocked sequins here. So it's just coming up through the felt, threading a sequin on, going back through the last, and then going forward like so. So each sequin is held on with like 2 stitches basically, but they layer over each other if you do it that way. So that's the way I prefer to do this. I'm going to grab a couple different colors here so I can gradate the sequins. I'm using a light green iridescent sequin, then I'm switching to a green, and then eventually to a dark blue, just to make this look a little bit iridescent to match up with the rest of what I'll be doing on this buddy. I tried to keep the colors of the embellishments on the back of this mostly turquoise and like mint green, a little bit of black, a little bit of golden yellow and orange, just so that I could wear this with the orange skirt from last week as well, because I wanted all 4 of these pieces to be quite interchangeable that I've been working on this month. But in general, I was keeping this in like the greens family of colors, but I do have some other beads that get thrown in there in the end, and then a lot of silver and gold, so you'll see that. So I can wear it with either metallic when it comes to like my handbag or my jewelry with this, although this jacket will be so embellished that it would be silly almost to wear it with large jewelry, because it would just compete with this epic jacket. The jacket becomes jewelry in the end, I promise. But just filling in this side with sequins. The sequins also get progressively a tiny bit larger as I work out to the edge of the wing as well. So these are iridescent blue-green sequins, and they just change size as I go out. I grabbed some iridescent red sequins as well. These are called iris finish when it comes to sequins. It's usually called aurora borealis or AB finish when it comes to beads, but for sequins, the iridescent finish is usually called iris finish. So fun fact there about sequins. And again, if you've never been on Cartwright sequins, each little packet of sequins is not very expensive, but it adds up fast when you add every freaking color that you would ever desire and dream of into your cart. So be careful over there. But do have fun. Tell them I sent you if they ask. I don't know. Can I have a future sequin sponsorship? I wouldn't mind, honestly. And then I did grab some gold work embroidery threads here. These are metal bullion threads. I'm just going to cut tiny, tiny little pieces of that to use almost as beads and just stitch those down into the gold area of this just for a little bit more sparkle. And I used a lot of these metallic coiled embroidery threads. They're like what you would use for gold work embroidery, but they come in many, many colors now. Of course, in the past, they used to have silver, gold, copper. Now they have all different colors of alloys and like plated ones of these. Again, I can link my favorite shop for bullion thread from Etsy in the description below as well. If you also would like some metallic threads, you know, in case you're doing some metallic embroidery. Goldwork embroidery is actually very fun, but I'm kind of using them more as beads for this particular piece. But I did do a couple of goldwork beetles on this jacket as well. But in the end, this is what the first wing looks like. I just need to replicate this on the other side. But that was going to take me half a day. So we'll come back to those cicadas later. For now, I'm going to make this little Klimt-inspired golden beetle here. I should have made more of these mosaic beetles, but at this point I was like, oh my god, this is taking days longer than I thought. Ugh. But it takes hours and hours to make even a small little beetle like this. It probably took me maybe 2 or 3 hours to make this little buddy. So when people ask me sometimes to sell my beetle brooches or the spiders and stuff, but I think they ask not knowing how much that would cost, because if I were to make these to sell, my time is very valuable to me, and therefore I would charge, you know, for it. So it's not like the cost of the felt and the sequins is much, but the cost of my time to make these is a lot, especially because I'm a full-time YouTuber, and I already don't get time to write, which is my side gig at all anyway. So if I were to sell these as brooches, it would be in the hundreds of dollars. So you don't really want me to sell them, I promise. Just make your own. You can do it. I have faith in you. Or, of course, there is a company called Trovelore who makes beaded bug brooches. That's how I got inspired to make my own as well. So I have a couple of Trovelore, and they are much finer done than mine are anyway. But here I'm just stringing on some beads and then couching that string of beads down. So you just string on whatever beads you want, put the needle back up and down through the felt to hold on each. So you just like take little stitches over the full length of beads to hold them down. It's called couching when it comes to embroidery. Just doing smaller stitches to hold down a longer stitch. You can couch embroidery thread or gold bullion thread for gold work embroidery, or beads like this. Just going along using Tila beads. I never know how this is pronounced. Tila. I think it's Tila beads. And seed beads and little bits of gold work thread to fill in this buddy. I really like these square beads because it does give that very Klimt painting looking effect. But I was using my gold and yellow ones for this buddy. Again, I wanted to incorporate that kind of iridescent gold, bronze, and copper colorway into the back of this jacket as well, so I could wear it with the orange apricot colored taffeta skirt as well. There we go. But let's make some more. I'm going to use this burgundy felt here, make a couple more, using these iridescent cupped red sequins for these next ones, but I'll skip ahead. We can't spend all day beading beetles, although, yes, I did. For the shoulder yokes on the back and the front of this jacket, I did go ahead and do some spider webs as a base before I did my beadwork embroidery. So I'm just split stitching, which is just, you know, backstitch, basically, with embroidery floss. Again, this is, I think, 4 strands of embroidery floss. It wasn't the full 6, I don't think. In a lighter olive color. Over my yokes, I sketched on the spider web that I wanted, as you can see, in white, and just cover that up with thread. Trust me, it's all going to be covered up eventually because I'm about to add a whole aviary's worth of bugs over on this buddy. But I'm just, yeah, split stitching my way along for the spider web. I will add the like ribs of the spider web or the swoopier bits as well. This is going to be completely covered up, so although the spider webs looked quite nice, it's too bad because it's really a very subtle detail in the end because it's all being covered up by these little buddies living on top of the spider web, hopefully not being eaten by spiders. But I did put a few spiders in there. This is actually what I'm doing now. I'm putting I think I just made this buddy with 8 legs. I don't actually remember. I think this was an arachnid, but we have a lot going on here. You'll see I have very, again, different sizes of sequins, beads going on here. I have actual Electro beetle, like jewel beetle wings that actually I was sent as a gift, so thank you. I finally put those to use in this jacket. They are top drilled, so I sewed those on. So this does have a little bit of genuine beetle wing going on here. But the rest of this is actually sequins. I have those beetle wing shaped white iridescent sequins. You can kind of see them underneath my hand down there. Those are vintage sequins that I found on Etsy. But I'm using mostly the bullion or the metal embroidery thread as the legs for all these guys. And I have lots of that sitting here on my desk. You can't see how messy my desk is just out of frame. But I promise the entire studio was very messy at this point because I was just so focused on finishing this project that the studio was and actually remains a disaster. So I need to fix that soon here. But here I'm sewing down a little gold work puffy beetle. And then I will sew down some of the real beetle wing casings surrounding this buddy. Finishing off with some sequins and again little legs made out of the coiled gold thread. And I was actually filing down any of the rough edges on these beetle wings because they do come off of a real beetle. And so they do have quite pointy ends on them. So I was using a nail file to file them down so they weren't quite as sharp. But of course the iridescence of these real beetle wing casings, nothing can really quite match that. I wish people were making sequins like that, but I haven't found any, that's for sure. And here are my finished mint and black and purple cicadas that will go on the back here. And then these are glass beetle beads that I found on Etsy. So again, I will have those linked below, but I'm just figuring out the arrangement of the main situation going on back here. A lot of this is inspired by, well, framed Victorian butterflies, of course. And you know how much I love framed entomology stuff anyway. But also those like Damien Hirst pictures that he does. Not that I'm a huge fan of Damien Hirst, but I do quite like his butterfly work. But I just stitched these 4 main cicadas down and then filled in the space around them. I will link below to one of the Damien Hirst / Alexander McQueen scarves that they came out with many years ago as an anniversary of the McQueen Skull Scarf project. Hopefully, those of you who know Alexander McQueen know what I'm talking about. But I did just stitch these buddies down, like I cut around the embroidery work. That's why I had those French knots to give me like a baseline for where to cut. Cut out these felt cicadas and I stitched them down as invisibly as I could to the back of the jacket here. And then I started filling these in with more and more bugs and like the larger bug beads. And so I just sewed down all the larger stuff first and then I filled in all the empty space with butterfly shaped sequins and other sequins. So I went and filled in most of the negative space down the center back of this jacket with sequins, either butterfly shaped ones or just round sequins. I have these little flower shaped sequins that are the exact same dark olive color. So that was nice. I used a lot of those on the back of this. I had gold butterfly sequins, silver butterfly sequins, and then these iridescent pastel colored butterfly sequins that were a little bit larger. But I just filled in the whole back of this with as many sequins as possible. And I think the filling in, like sewing the stuff, the larger pieces on took several hours for some reason. And then the filling in, I think, took 2 full days. Overall, with this jacket, with all the embroidery, I watched, I think, 4 full seasons of QI online. So I like ran out of available QI to watch in the United States because it's hard to watch it over here. And then I watched, I think, half a season of The Addams Family also. So, you know, I had a lot going on in the background because I had several days of airtime to fill while I sewed on all these buddies. But the resulting sparkly effect, I think you will agree, is quite intense on the back of here. This is, again, another jacket where the front is okay, but the back is where we really, literally shine. So yes, after over a week of embroidery, this is what I ended up with. Lots and lots of sparkling bugs down the back of this jacket. And with the embroidery finished, this jacket was finished, and I'll show you exactly what this buddy looks like on. And here is my finished jacket in the Mandragora silk taffeta from Silk Baron again, of course. And I'm so pleased with how this came out. It was a ton of work, but now finally being able to step back a tiny bit and get a look at it, I am so pleased with how this came out. It's just I mean, in my opinion, stunning. I made it just for me and to my liking. I could have done a dozen different colorways for all the embellishment on the back of this, but I really thought that a mint green and a turquoise would look so good with this olive green, and I'm happy to have finally played around with those colors mixed with this olive. Where will I wear this? I guess any special event ever for the rest of my life, I will wear this. Should I just show up when, if and when I do end up, I don't know, either signing for a book deal or signing for a house, the two most dream things I have in my life that I look forward to hopefully achieving one day, maybe I'll just wear this and shock whoever I'm sitting with. I mean, imagine like some random realtor's office and I walk in this. I think it could go over quite fun. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this project has come together and the different embellishment options and different ways I went about going ahead and constructing all of this stuff. I think interlining has been a big step up, you know, in my way to learning how to do tailoring. I'll get there hopefully eventually. I do want to take some proper classes sometime, but on the way there, at least we can have some fun with my dressmaking techniques and trying my best. Thank you as always for watching today, and thank you to my patrons for making giant projects like this possible. I would not be able to play around and sit embroidering cicadas for days on end without your support and making my job here a reality. I have a lot of spooky content planned for the next month, so I'll see you for the rest of that real soon. Bye.